The first day I walked into that lecture hall, I had no idea my life was about to change in a way I never imagined. It was an ordinary morning, one of those days where you attend class only because your attendance depends on it. The room was filled with the usual noise of students talking loudly, laughing recklessly, scrolling through their phones, and waiting impatiently for the lecturer who was rumored to be new. I picked a seat near the middle, dropped my bag beside me, and rested my head against the desk, half asleep and bored before the class even began. Then the door opened, and the entire atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that felt unreal. If you love deep, emotional, and unforgettable stories, hit subscribe right now, like this video, and let's dive into today's story. She walked in calmly, carrying a stack of books close to her chest, dressed neatly but simply, with a confidence that didn't need loudness to be noticed. At first, I only saw movement in my peripheral vision, but when I raised my head and my eyes met hers for just a second, it felt like time slowed. The room grew quiet without anyone asking for silence. Even the loudest students stopped talking. It wasn't only her beauty that caught everyone's attention. It was something deeper, something in the way she carried herself, the quiet power in her steps, the gentle authority in her eyes. I remember thinking to myself that she looked too young to be standing at the front as a lecturer, and yet she looked perfectly placed there, as though she had always belonged there. She wrote her name on the board with steady hands and introduced herself with a soft but confident voice that traveled easily across the room. Every word she spoke seemed to command focus without effort. As she explained the course outline, her expectations, and her passion for teaching, I found myself staring without realizing it, barely absorbing the actual content of what she was saying. My heart beat faster than usual, not from fear or nervousness, but from a strange excitement I couldn't explain. I had seen beautiful women before, but something about her felt different. She was not just attractive. She felt unreachable, like a dream wrapped in reality, standing right in front of me. As the lecture continued, I tried to force myself to concentrate on the lesson, but my mind kept drifting back to her smile, the subtle way her lips curved when she explained something, the intelligence in her eyes when she challenged the class with questions. Every time she walked between the rows, I felt my body tense, hoping she would stop near me, hoping she would notice me. And when she finally asked a question that no one seemed confident enough to answer, I surprised myself by raising my hand. My voice trembled slightly as I gave my response, but she listened carefully, nodded slowly, and then smiled at me in approval. In that brief instant, with the whole class watching, something shifted inside me that I didn't yet understand. After the lecture ended, students rushed out in noisy groups, discussing her beauty more than the lesson itself. I stayed seated for a moment, watching as she organized her materials at the front. I wanted to walk up to her, to say something intelligent, something that would make her remember me, but fear held my feet in place. Who was I compared to her? Just another student in a sea of faces. When she finally left the room, a strange emptiness followed her absence, and for the first time in my life, I realized that one single moment, one single encounter, could disturb the quiet order of a person's world so completely. For the rest of that day, my thoughts were restless. I tried to study, but my mind kept replaying the way she had walked in, the way she spoke, the way she had looked at me when I answered that question. I told myself it was nothing, just a harmless attraction, the kind that fades by morning. Yet deep inside, I knew it was already more than that. When night fell and the campus quieted down, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, feeling the strange pull of a connection that had barely begun. I did not yet know that this feeling would grow, that it would test my limits, my morals, my heart, and my future in ways I was not prepared for. From that day forward, everything about my routine began to revolve around her without me even trying to make it so. I arrived earlier than usual to every lecture, choosing a seat where I could clearly see the front of the room. I pretended that my sudden academic seriousness was about grades and discipline, but deep inside I knew the truth. I was waiting for her. Each time the door opened, my heart jumped, anticipating her entrance. When she finally walked in, calm and composed as always, the entire room seemed to fall into rhythm with her presence. I listened more closely to every word she said, not only because of what she taught, but because of how her voice made me feel grounded and restless at the same time. I began to participate more in class discussions, asking thoughtful questions, offering detailed answers, not because I was suddenly brilliant, but because I wanted to be seen by her, not as just another student but as someone different. As the weeks passed, she started to notice me more. At first, it was subtle, the way her eyes lingered on me for a second longer after I answered a question. The way she nodded with approval when I made a point during discussions. Then it became more direct. She began calling my name more often, asking me to explain concepts to the class, trusting me with responsibilities like organizing group presentations and assisting with distributing materials. Each time she spoke my name, it felt like electricity ran through my body. After class, some students teased me lightly, calling me the lecturer's favorite, but I laughed it off, pretending not to care. Inside, though, I cared more than I could explain. I began staying behind after lectures under the excuse of needing clarification. Our conversation started formally, about coursework, deadlines, and academic goals, but slowly drifted into casual territory, touching on dreams, fears, and personal struggles that had nothing to do with the subject she taught. One evening, after most of the students had left, I stayed back again, pretending to struggle with an assignment I already understood. The lecture hall was nearly empty, the lights dimmer than usual, and the silence between us felt heavier than before. She stood beside my desk, leaning slightly as she explained a concept for the third time, her voice calm and patient. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, something soft and subtle that made it harder to breathe. At some point, she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me carefully, as if searching my face for something she couldn't quite name. I felt my throat tighten, unsure of what to say, unsure of what she saw in my eyes. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, warm and dangerous, before she straightened up and took a step back, reminding herself softly that she had another appointment to attend. As she walked away, I realized with sudden clarity that whatever was growing between us was no longer one-sided. After that night, everything changed in small but undeniable ways. She began to share stories about her life during our brief after-class talks. How she fought hard to earn her position, how loneliness followed her success, how people often saw her only as a lecturer and never as a woman with her own fears and needs. I listened to her with genuine care, not pretending to understand, but truly wanting to. The more she opened up, the deeper my feelings grew. I started hiding my emotions behind jokes and respectful distance, but my heart refused to listen to reason. I knew she was my lecturer. I knew there were rules, boundaries, and consequences. Yet every time she smiled at me, every time she asked how my day was going, every time she thanked me for my effort, those rules felt distant and unreal. Without ever touching, without ever confessing, we were already standing on dangerous ground, both aware of it, yet pretending we were still safely on the right side. The tension between us didn't explode all at once. It crept in quietly, wrapping itself around every interaction until it became impossible to ignore. Our conversations after class grew longer, stretching from a few minutes into half-hour discussions that felt timeless. We spoke about ambitions, regrets, disappointments, and dreams we were afraid to say out loud to anyone else. She began to trust me with the parts of her life she kept hidden from the world, the exhaustion behind her confidence, the pressure of expectations placed on her shoulders, and the loneliness that followed her accomplishments like a shadow. I could feel myself becoming more than just a student to her, the same way she had already become more than just a lecturer to me. Yet we both avoided naming what hovered between us, because once spoken, it would become real, and reality carried consequences neither of us felt ready to face. The moment that truly cracked the wall between us came unexpectedly on a day the sky opened in heavy rain. The campus emptied faster than usual as students scrambled for shelter, laughter echoing through the halls as umbrellas flipped inside out under the force of the storm. I had stayed late at the library studying, and when I finally stepped outside, the rain was too intense to walk through. I stood beneath the shade near the entrance, watching the downpour when I noticed her across the courtyard, also trapped by the rain. Our eyes met from a distance, and she smiled softly before cautiously stepping closer. The storm forced us into the same small shelter, the sound of rain loud enough to swallow the silence between us. That night, the weather trapped us in more ways than one. We talked as we waited for the rain to slow, our conversation flowing without effort, free from the walls of the classroom and the weight of titles. She laughed more freely than I had ever seen before, her guard lowered by the absurdity of being stranded by something as simple as rain. When she shivered slightly from the cold, I instinctively offered my jacket before thinking twice. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it, our fingers brushing briefly as the fabric changed hands, sending a quiet jolt through both of us. In that small, unplanned moment, something shifted. We were no longer lecturer and student standing under a roof. We were two people sharing warmth, vulnerability, and a feeling neither of us dared to speak. When the rain refused to stop, she suggested we walk to a nearby cafe just outside campus to wait it out. The suggestion alone felt dangerous, crossing a line neither of us had stepped over before. Yet without hesitation I agreed. We ran through the rain together, soaked and laughing like children escaping the rules of the world for a brief moment. Inside the quiet cafe, warmth replaced the cold, and low music filled the space between us. We sat across from each other, hands wrapped around warm cups, eyes locked in a way that felt too intimate for the situation we were pretending to be in. People around us looked at us as though we were a couple, and for a heartbeat, neither of us corrected that assumption. It was there, in that cafe, that her walls finally came down. She spoke about the sacrifices she made to reach her position, the relationships she walked away from, the way people admired her achievements but never asked if she was truly happy. Her voice softened when she admitted how lonely it felt to be admired but not truly known. I listened in silence, absorbing every word, feeling a painful urge to reach across the table and pull her into my arms. When I told her that I saw her, not just as a lecturer but as a woman with real struggles and fears, her eyes filled with unshed emotion. In that moment, the world narrowed to just the two of us, sitting in that quiet corner as something unspoken grew heavier in the air. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences we had shared. It was charged with truth. She looked at me for a long time, as if deciding something within herself. Then, slowly, her hand reached across the table and rested over mine. The touch was light, trembling, hesitant, but it shattered every boundary we had carefully constructed in our minds. My heartbeat felt loud in my ears as I looked at her, searching for doubt, for fear, for any sign that this was a mistake in her eyes. Instead, I saw the same confusion and longing reflected back at me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The line we had both feared had finally been crossed, not with passion or impulse, but with quiet surrender. When we finally parted that night, it felt unreal. We stood outside beneath the dim glow of the streetlights, the storm now reduced to a gentle drizzle. She hesitated before returning my jacket, her fingers lingering against mine for just a second too long. She whispered my name softly, not as a lecturer calling a student, but as a woman speaking to someone she cared about. I wanted to kiss her. The urge was overwhelming, burning in my chest with a force I had never known. But fear stopped me, not fear of rejection, but fear of what that kiss would set into motion. We separated without another word, each walking in opposite directions with hearts pounding and minds racing with the weight of what had just happened. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay awake replaying every second of our time together, the rain, the laughter, the touch, the way she looked at me as though she was seeing me for the first time. Guilt and excitement tangled inside me, twisting my thoughts into knots. I knew this path was forbidden. I knew there were rules for a reason. I knew people would judge, careers could be destroyed, and futures could collapse. Yet despite all this knowledge, my heart felt lighter than it ever had before. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone she trusted, someone she leaned toward, someone who had crossed into a place I never imagined I would enter. The days that followed were charged with unspoken tension. In class, she acted as though nothing had changed, maintaining professionalism with a precision that almost felt painful. But every glance we exchanged, every pause that lingered a second longer than necessary, carried the secret of that rainy night. When no one was watching, her eyes softened toward me with a warmth I could never mistake. I struggled to focus on my studies, my thoughts constantly drifting back to the memory of her hand over mine. What once felt like a distant fantasy now felt dangerously real. The world around us continued as usual, unaware that two lives had quietly shifted off balance under the cover of rain and silence. By the end of that week, the truth was undeniable. We were standing on the edge of something powerful and destructive at the same time. Neither of us had spoken the words, but both of us felt them pressing against our chests, demanding to be acknowledged. The air between us was thick with restrained emotion, desire fighting against responsibility, longing wrestling with logic. I didn't know then how far this path would go, or how much it would cost us both. All I knew was that I had fallen deeply, recklessly, and perhaps irreversibly in love with the beautiful young lecturer who was never supposed to see me as anything more than her student. The days after that night at the cafe felt like walking through fire while pretending everything was normal. In the lecture hall, she became colder in her professionalism than ever before, as though she was trying to erase what had happened with sheer discipline alone. She called on other students more than me, avoided my direction when she moved between the rows, and spoke to me only when absolutely necessary. Yet every time our eyes accidentally met, there was a quiet storm behind her gaze that betrayed everything she was trying to hide. I felt torn between respecting the wall she was rebuilding and the ache in my chest that came from watching her pretend we hadn't crossed a line that would never truly fade. Outside the classroom, everything was different. Our messages became infrequent but heavy with meaning, written with careful words that danced around what we truly felt. A simple "How are you today?" from her carried the weight of longing and restraint. When I replied, I chose my words just as cautiously, knowing how dangerous even a single careless sentence could be. The silence between our conversations felt louder than the storm that had brought us together. I walked through campus feeling like I was living two lives at once. The obedient student everyone saw and the young man quietly in love with a woman he could never safely claim. It was during a late afternoon when everything shifted again. I had stayed behind under the excuse of submitting an assignment, though we both knew it could wait. The hallway outside her office was empty, the sound of distant footsteps fading as the building grew quiet. When I entered, she closed the door slowly behind me, not with fear, but with a kind of exhausted surrender. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavier than it ever had before. Then she finally lifted her eyes to mine, and the restraint that had held her together for days cracked in a way that no storm ever could. She told me the truth that day without hiding behind titles or rules. She admitted that she had tried to push me away because she was scared. Not of me, but of what she felt when she was with me. She said she had never planned for this, never wanted this, never believed it could happen. Yet it had. She spoke of her career, her reputation, her responsibility, and the years of sacrifice that stood in the balance. As she talked, I saw the war inside her, the struggle between the woman she was and the role she carried. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't with reckless passion, but with quiet honesty. I told her I never planned to fall in love with her either, but that my heart had already chosen, regardless of the cost. That was the moment the secret relationship truly began. Not with a kiss, not with promises, but with mutual confession. We sat across from each other in heavy silence, both knowing that once truth was spoken, it could never be taken back. That was the first time she allowed herself to smile at me without fear, small and fragile, as though she was stepping onto unstable ground. We didn't touch that day, yet it felt more intimate than any physical contact could have been. From that moment forward, we were no longer pretending that nothing was happening. We were actively choosing to carry something forbidden between us. Our meetings became rare and carefully planned. We never met on campus alone again. Instead, we found quiet corners of the city where no one knew our names. Bookshops with dim lighting, quiet parks at dusk, cafes far from the university where no one looked twice at us sitting across from each other. We spoke in lowered voices, not from fear alone, but from the weight of the secret we carried. Every smile felt stolen. Every laugh felt dangerous. Yet every moment with her felt like life itself had sharpened into something intense and real. I had never known love could feel like both freedom and prison at the same time. With every passing week, the emotional bond between us grew heavier. She leaned on me in ways she never had before, sharing doubts about her career, her exhaustion, the loneliness that had followed her success. I became her refuge, and she became my entire world. At the same time, the pressure of hiding us began to change me. I became guarded around my friends, distant from my classmates, careful about every word I spoke. I lived in constant fear of being seen in the wrong place at the wrong time. Love had filled my heart, but fear had wrapped itself around my thoughts. The first time we kissed, it wasn't planned, and it wasn't dramatic. It happened in silence, in one of those quiet moments when words failed us both. We were standing beneath a streetlight after walking together for hours, neither of us wanting the night to end. She looked at me the way she had that night in the rain, her eyes soft with a feeling that had nowhere else to go. I didn't move at first. I waited for her to pull away, but instead, she leaned in slowly, her hesitation trembling between us. When our lips finally met, it felt like the world paused just long enough to witness the mistake we both wanted. When we separated, she pressed her forehead against mine and whispered that this could destroy everything. I had no answer for that. All I could do was hold her hand and feel the truth of her words settle heavily into my chest. From that night on, everything became more intense. The love was no longer only emotional, it had stepped fully into reality. Yet with that reality came consequences that neither of us could ignore. She began to withdraw emotionally at times, pulling back after moments of closeness, as though punishing herself for every step she took toward me. I could see it in her eyes, the guilt fighting against the love she tried so hard to control. There were days she wouldn't reply to my messages at all, and nights she would call me in tears, confessing how torn she felt between her heart and the life she had built. I tried to be strong for both of us, but fear slowly crept into my own heart as well. Rumors began to shift through the campus like quiet whispers carried by unseen winds. At first, they were harmless. Students joking about favoritism, about how I always seemed to sit nearer the front, about how she always seemed more cautious around me than anyone else. But whispers grow teeth when they are fed, and soon curiosity turned into suspicion. I noticed more eyes watching us in the lecture hall, more silence when I spoke, more questions hidden beneath casual conversations. The walls were closing in slowly, and we both felt it, even when we refused to speak about it aloud. By the end of the semester, we were living inside a contradiction that was tearing at both of us. We loved each other deeply in private and kept painful distance in public. We longed for simple moments that ordinary couples took for granted. Walking hand in daylight, speaking freely, not having to calculate every step. Yet we were trapped inside a reality where love was not only forbidden but dangerous. And still, neither of us let go. We kept choosing each other in silence, knowing the cost was rising with every passing day. As the semester drew closer to its end, the tension reached a level that neither of us could ignore any longer. One mistake, one careless glance, one exposed message would be enough to bring everything crashing down. She began speaking about transfer requests, about further studies, about ways she could disappear from this place before the truth found us. I listened with fear tightening my chest, knowing that even escape would come with heartbreak. The love that once felt like a gift now felt like a ticking clock. And deep inside, I sensed that we were running out of time far faster than either of us was prepared to face. The beginning of the end did not arrive with a loud explosion or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, disguised as small changes that were easy to ignore at first. She grew more distant in public than ever, not even allowing her eyes to linger on me during lectures. The warmth that once slipped through her discipline disappeared behind an iron mask of professionalism. At first, I told myself she was just being careful, protecting us both as the pressure increased. But deep down, I felt something heavier shifting beneath the surface. Messages that once came at night stopped entirely. Calls that once carried comfort were replaced by silence. I walked through my days with an ache in my chest, sensing that something was slipping away from me, yet unable to reach out and pull it back. The rumors, which had once lived only in whispers, started growing bolder. I could feel the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the subtle shift in the way some classmates looked at me, their curiosity sharpened into judgment. A few friends asked careless questions wrapped in jokes, testing how I would react. I laughed them off on the surface, but inside, fear crawled up my spine. I knew it only took one person seeing us in the wrong place, one message falling into the wrong hands, one careless moment for everything to collapse. The campus felt smaller with every passing day, as though the walls themselves were leaning inward, listening for our secret. Then one afternoon, without warning, I received a message from her that sent cold through my veins. It was short, stripped of emotion, and devastatingly formal. She told me we could no longer communicate the way we had been. She said it was for both our safety. She said we had gone too far and that the risk was now greater than the feeling. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say she still cared. She simply ended it with a sentence that felt like a door being locked from the inside. I stared at my phone for a long time after reading it, hoping for a second message that never came. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Days passed, and the emotional distance she created felt sharper than any argument ever could have been. When I saw her in class, she was colder than I had ever known her to be. She spoke with precise control, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. If our eyes ever met, it was only by accident and only for a split second before she turned away. It felt as though the woman who had once leaned toward me in quiet vulnerability had vanished into someone I barely recognized. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to beg for honesty, but fear held me back. I knew that any emotional reaction would only make things worse, so I swallowed my pain and pretended I was fine. It was during this fragile silence that the truth finally surfaced in the most brutal way possible. I was called to the administrative office late one morning without any explanation. The request alone sent panic racing through my body. As I walked down the hallway, every step felt heavier than the last. When I entered the office, I knew immediately that the rumors had found their way into something far more dangerous than whispers. The administrators sat behind their desks with hard expressions, files opened before them. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. The evidence was there, printed messages, screenshots, photographs taken from a distance. The secret we had fought so hard to protect was now laid out in cold, undeniable proof. Shame flooded my body as their questions began. They asked when it started, how deep it went, whether there had been inappropriate behavior on campus, whether my academic performance had been influenced in any way. My mouth felt dry as I answered, choosing my words carefully, desperate to protect her even as everything fell apart. They told me the investigation had already begun. They told me her suspension had taken effect immediately until the matter was resolved. When I heard that word, suspension, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. The consequences we had feared in secret were no longer distant possibilities. They were real, heavy, and irreversible. The news spread through the campus faster than I could have imagined. By the time I left the office, students were already whispering openly. Some stared without shame. Some looked at me with curiosity. Others with quiet disgust. Friends who once laughed beside me now watched from a distance, unsure whether to approach or turn away. My phone was flooded with messages, some asking questions, some pretending concern, some openly accusing. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before, as though every private emotion I had carried had been dragged into the open for strangers to examine and judge. I realized in that moment that secrets do not disappear quietly. They explode, and the damage does not choose its victims gently. I did not see her after the suspension was announced. She vanished from the campus as though she had never existed there at all. No office door remained open to knock on. No message came through my phone. The silence she had created was now absolute. I later learned through someone else that she had been ordered to stay away from the university entirely while the investigation continued. The thought of her sitting somewhere alone, stripped of the position she had worked so hard to achieve, cut deeper than any insult I faced myself. Even in my shame and fear, my heart stayed with her. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to comfort her. But I had lost the right to do either. The pressure became unbearable. My academic life unraveled as quickly as my emotional one. Lectures felt meaningless. Assignments went unfinished. Concentration became impossible. Every quiet moment left space for regret to crawl back into my thoughts. I replayed every decision we made, every step that led us to this moment. I wondered which second, which message, which meeting had sealed our fate. I wondered if loving her had been wrong from the start, or if it was only our timing that had been cursed. I had no answers, only the heavy weight of consequences that neither of us could escape. Weeks passed, and the investigation dragged on like a slow punishment. Some days, I felt anger toward her for pushing me away so suddenly. Other days, I felt nothing but guilt for being the reason her career stood on the edge of destruction. I lived inside emotional contradictions that pulled me in opposite directions. The world around me kept moving, but I felt frozen in the moment everything collapsed. Even when the noise of gossip finally faded, the damage remained. My reputation had changed. My sense of identity had fractured. And the woman I loved had disappeared into a silence I could no longer breach. Then, one evening, long after the campus had begun to feel like a place haunted by memory, I received a single message from an unknown number. My breath caught as I opened it, already knowing who it was. She wrote only a few lines, but each one struck deep. She said she was leaving the city. She said the investigation had destroyed any chance of her returning to teaching at this institution. She said she did not blame me, but she could not carry the weight of what we had become. She told me to live my life, to finish my studies, to become someone strong enough to survive what love had done to us. There were no promises, no hope of reunion, only a quiet ending written in careful words. That night, I finally allowed myself to grieve, not just for the relationship we had lost, but for the version of myself that no longer existed. The boy who walked into that lecture hall on the first day, bored and unaware, had vanished forever. In his place stood someone who had tasted a love powerful enough to destroy and transform at the same time. I did not know what the future held. I only knew that the chapter we had written together had closed in scandal, silence, and irreversible change. And I sensed, with aching clarity, that the final outcome of our story was still waiting somewhere ahead. Years passed like a slow river carrying memories I could never fully let go of. After the scandal and the separation, life felt hollow, as though a part of me had been carved away and left behind in the shadows of that forbidden love. I finished my studies quietly, avoiding conversations about the past, pretending to move on while the weight of what had been lost pressed relentlessly against my chest. Every time I passed the lecture halls where we had shared stolen glances, I could almost feel her presence beside me, a haunting echo of the woman who had once changed my world with nothing more than a look and a smile. Life moved forward, but time did little to heal the wound she had left. It wasn't until a conference years later that fate chose to intervene in a way I could not ignore. I was attending an academic seminar, one that brought together lecturers, students, and professionals from across the country. The room was filled with faces both familiar and unknown, the low hum of conversation filling the air as people found seats and exchanged polite greetings. Then, standing at the podium, I saw her, the same woman who had been my world, my secret, and my heartbreak, now commanding the attention of hundreds with the same poise, the same brilliance, and the same quiet magnetism that had captured me so many years before. She looked more confident than ever, her presence impossible to ignore, her beauty and intelligence still radiating powerfully. After her presentation, I found myself lingering in the crowd, unsure of whether I was acting on impulse or fate. She stepped down from the podium and walked through the audience, scanning the faces in search of something or someone. When her eyes met mine, the years dissolved in an instant, leaving only the raw, unspoken connection we had shared. For a moment, neither of us moved, both of us suspended in a memory that refused to die. She smiled, a gentle curve that carried years of loss, struggle, and endurance, and suddenly, it was as if no time had passed at all. Every memory, every stolen moment, every tear and every laugh returned with vivid intensity, leaving me breathless. We found a quiet corner away from the crowd, where the world around us faded into muted noise. I wanted to speak, to pour out everything I had felt, everything I had thought, every moment I had spent longing for her. She looked at me, her eyes soft yet guarded, reflecting both warmth and a careful caution I had come to recognize. We spoke tentatively at first, exchanging the small details of life, the years apart, the paths we had chosen, the struggles we had faced. But soon, the conversation deepened and memories began to surface, each one a reminder of how powerful and consuming the love we had shared truly was. Every word, every glance, every gesture spoke of a connection that time could not erase. She told me how the scandal had forced her to rebuild her life from the ashes of her career. She spoke of nights spent wondering if she would ever love or trust again, of the sacrifices she had made to regain her professional footing, and of the loneliness that had followed her like a shadow she could not shake. Listening to her, I felt the weight of everything she had endured, the resilience it had taken for her to become the powerful woman I now saw before me. And yet, despite all the years and distance, despite the pain and heartbreak, I could still see the same spark, the same vulnerability, and the same warmth that had drawn me to her from the very first lecture. I told her my own story, the ways in which I had carried her in my heart, the moments when I had doubted myself, and the times I had longed for her presence. We laughed softly at the absurdity of fate, at the cruelty of timing, at the way life had tested us so harshly and yet brought us together again in this fleeting moment. The conversation was bittersweet, a mixture of joy and grief, of longing and closure. We spoke with honesty, without pretense, without the rules and boundaries that had once controlled every interaction. For a few precious hours, we existed outside the world, outside time, sharing the truth of our feelings and the reality of our love that had never fully died. When it was time to leave, we stood together quietly, neither of us ready to break the spell of reunion. She looked at me with a soft smile and said words that carried both finality and understanding. "Some love comes to teach us, not to stay." I felt a lump in my throat, the truth of her words piercing me deeply. She had loved me, I had loved her, and our love had shaped us in ways we could never forget. Yet, life had its own designs, and the timing, the circumstances, and the consequences had prevented our love from flourishing fully. In that moment, I understood that loving her had changed me forever, that it had made me stronger, wiser, and more aware of the fragile power of the human heart. As she walked away, I realized that closure was not about having her in my life permanently, but about accepting the love we had shared and letting it exist in its purest form, untouched, unbroken, yet impossible to fully hold. I watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling both emptiness and gratitude. Emptiness for the life we could not have shared, gratitude for the depth of emotion we had experienced together. In the months and years that followed, I carried that memory with me as a quiet force, a reminder that love, even when forbidden and painful, has the power to shape us into who we are meant to become. Life continued, as it always does, but something had shifted irreversibly within me. I approached each day with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that love is not always about possession, not always about presence, but about the depth of feeling it awakens within us. The memory of her, the brilliance, the warmth, and the quiet strength she embodied, became both a guiding light and a lesson. And while our story had ended in separation, it had left an indelible mark on both our lives. A reminder that some loves are not meant to stay, yet they are meant to teach us everything we need to know about our hearts and our capacity to feel deeply. In the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that true love is sometimes about letting go, about understanding the lessons it brings, and about carrying the experience forward without bitterness or regret. Our paths may never cross again, yet the impact of what we shared remains, shaping decisions, perspectives, and the way I view connections with others. Life had moved us apart, but it had also elevated us individually, creating strength, resilience, and a profound understanding of the depth and complexity of human emotion. And in that understanding, I found a peace I had never known before, a quiet acknowledgement that loving her, even briefly, had been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life.